think I first started when I was like 8 years old.
Wow.
I was like very much like into Pokemon and stuff and wanted to make like a website. So my mom
Wow.
taught me how to use like Microsoft front page to make the ugliest websites ever. And then I just started experimenting and building things on my own.
Your wife is a native speaker, right? If you have a spouse or a significant other who speaks Japanese, can you learn it from them?
In the beginning, speaking Japanese all day, my brain was fried. I couldn't handle that much Japanese within a single day. But as time went on, I had less issue with that.
You're not trying to necessarily go and start your own business or anything like that.
Not right now, at least.
You've been in Tokyo pretty much the whole time, and no interest in maybe trying to move somewhere else in Japan, like moving to the Inaka or like a different city or anything like that?
I do not want to live in the Inaka. That's like...
Welcome to the Japan Dev Podcast. I am Eric, founder of JapanDev.com, and today I'm sitting down with Anton, a software engineer who's been in Japan for about 8 years and has worked at some of the top companies in the country. I'm super excited to jump into this conversation. Welcome, Anton.
Hello, I'm Anton. I'm from Belgium. Been in Japan for quite a while, doing mostly software engineering, and happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining. I think to start off, let's just talk a little bit about how you became interested in Japan. You grew up in Belgium. What was your first exposure to Japan? I guess that set maybe that seed in your mind of like, maybe I would like to live there someday.
So originally I was playing a game, MapleStory, which isn't actually like a Japanese game, but like I couldn't play the Korean version, and the next best thing with like the most recent content was the Japan version. And that's what I started playing. Started learning Japanese.
Okay.
And after a while,
did you play the game? Okay. Did you play in Japanese?
Yes, I played it in Japanese, like with Japanese people. And after a while, like I quit the game, but I kept studying Japanese. Mostly like got interested in like Japanese media. Yeah,
Wow.
at some point, like I felt like I wanted to move abroad, not necessarily Japan, but like I didn't want to live back home for like my adult life. It didn't feel like was the best fit for me. So like I did like study abroad in Seoul, South Korea. Like I went on like a study trip in San Francisco Bay Area. I also did like a month trip to Japan. And then, given that I already like knew Japanese pretty well, I just said like, let's just give this a shot. And I'm still here 8 years later.
Wow. So your first exposure was the game, I guess playing with Japanese people. Yeah. And it wasn't so much like focused on Japan, but you had this idea of like, I want to go and live somewhere else.
Yes,
for
exactly.
At least some period of time and actually experience another culture, right? Other than my own. Was that due at all to like being in Belgium specifically? Like, did you feel like you wanted to kind of get out of that particular culture, or was it just like you wanted to kind of see more of the world?
I felt like working in Europe is like very different from other places abroad. Like, Europe is like quite regulated. There's like quite a few like rules. Everything's kind of strict. Like also like working hours are like quite early. And that just didn't work so well for me. Also, like wanting to have like more flexible working hours.
I see.
Well, like Europe also has a lot of great things, but like the exact set of constraints wasn't like the exact thing I was looking for.
I see. Cool. So you went to university back in Belgium, and you studied computer science, right?
It wasn't actually computer science. It was more like applied computer science, like new media communication technologies, where you like build websites and applications, mobile apps.
So you already had the interest.
I actually had like a different major for 2 years before, which was like a mix of like design and development. But then I kind of realized I wasn't great at the design part. So like I switched majors to just like be more like software engineering focused.
Wow. So you were interested in building things and programming from like a relatively young age?
Yeah, I think I first started when I was like 8 years old. I was like very much like into Pokemon and stuff, and wanted to make like a website. So my mom taught me how to use like Microsoft front page to make like the ugliest websites ever.
Wow.
And then like, I just started like experimenting and building things on my own.
Wow. Okay. So you had some exposure to Japan, like the Pokemon, the games, etc. And then you were already pretty into programming, so it makes sense that you would maybe, study computer related things during university.
Mm.
And then I guess maybe the combination of those things was what ultimately would lead you to Japan. But first, you did get some experience working in Belgium during your university days as an intern. And
Yes.
so can you talk a little bit about what that was like, actually trying to work as a, I guess, software engineer back in Belgium?
I actually did my first internship during high school. Like during high school, you need to do like 2 weeks of like internship of something. Yeah, that's when I started working as a web developer at like a website agency. So like building websites for like small to medium businesses. And I
Okay.
did that afterwards for like 2 years, I think, during the summer, like the maximum allowed days that I'm allowed to work as a student. After that, I started working at like a real estate startup back home where a friend of mine was also working, and I got an internship through him.
Wow. Were you doing that while studying or like over the summers, or how did that work?
So in the beginning, mostly over the summers, but like when I mentioned, like when I switched majors, like the first year I had some like openings in my schedule. So like I didn't really have to do anything. So I decided to do some work during that time and gain some experience.
Was it kind of what you expected? Was it harder? Like, were there any difficulties that you kind of ran into actually working as a software engineer in like a business environment?
I think it was a big change from like building things on my own to like working in a team. So that was something that I pretty much had to learn. Like at the real estate startup, like at the website agency, it was like mostly by myself building one specific website. And like everyone was working on like one website. So it was not really like teamwork. But like at the startup, we were like building one product with 15 people or something, 10, 15 people. So like immediately it's a different way of working. Things like morning stand up and those kind of things, like actually having to communicate with other people. I think that was like great to experience that before actually starting to work professionally.
Yes, I could see how that would be very valuable. And did you have to do like code reviews and that type of thing as well?
I don't remember exactly, but I'm not sure if we did like a whole lot of code reviewing at that point. It
Okay.
was like what was still quite like cowboy style of programming, like still like just getting features launched as soon as possible. Try to get like market share, like try to validate our ID.
That's valuable experience too, though. I think it helps you
Yeah.
think more maybe about the from a product perspective
Yeah.
and think about the business. Whereas like at a bigger company with super like buttoned up operations and everything, you can end up being in a bit of a tech bubble where you just have to think about your own feature that you're building and the spec. There's a
That's true.
spec or whatever. I think it's good to get both.
Yeah. In our
also, like,
case, our spec was just a whiteboard. Whatever ID we ideated on that.
Right. Yeah, I think that like being in that kind of scrappy environment is super valuable too. So I guess at some point you must have had this idea, since you ended up here in Japan, of moving here. So like what was it that kind of like put you over the edge and was like, you know what, when I graduate, I want to move to Japan? Like what was the thinking behind that?
I was pretty sure like I wanted to try Japan like right after my internship my study abroad in Korea. I already had the idea like in my head like since the beginning of university, but like after actually living abroad, like having to be completely responsible for myself in like this completely unknown environment where I don't know a whole lot of people and I basically have to relearn how to live, like how to be an adult and everything. Was like, okay, I'm actually gonna do this.
You said that was in Korea.
Yeah.
But you had the interest in Japan separately, and you were like, okay, this time I want to try Japan.
Yeah.
Like get like a similar kind of
I consider
but...
both like Bay Area, Seoul and Tokyo. Like Bay Area, I didn't feel like culturally I was a great match. Kinda just scrapped that one. Then for Korea, I didn't feel as realistic given my language ability in Korean was enough to order beer and chicken and ask for the restroom and nothing more. And then for Japanese, it was like I could read comfortably, but like I couldn't speak yet. So like a lot more realistic for me to try that.
That's very interesting, and probably not the case for most people when they move. They wouldn't be able to read either. But you were basically spending a lot of time, I guess. I mean, you were obviously exposed to Japanese through the games as well, but you were also really into like Japanese comics as well, right?
Yeah.
Is why you had already attained a pretty good reading level at that point?
I wanted to read like manga that wasn't translated yet, so like I basically had to read them in Japanese, and then I'll start get to novels in Japanese. So like my reading level just got increasingly better and better just by like reading so much of it.
Wow.
I think I actually spent more time on Japanese than my actual studies during university. But like also like by the time I got to university, like I probably could already work as like a junior software engineer before actually starting university, because like I just spent most of my time during high school just building things and experimenting, and
So you
I had
had
like a
already
lot of time
really
on my hands.
right. And you used it to really set the groundwork for moving to Japan, because most
Yeah.
people they don't have that level of engineering skill yet, or the Japanese level. But it's really interesting that you focused though on like reading first.
Yeah.
And I mean, you must have been able to maybe speak a little bit, right?
When I first did like my job hunting in Japan, I could do my interviews in Japanese. But then
Okay.
when I went to order ramen and I wasn't like used to the situation, I didn't know what they were going to ask. That was actually more difficult for me than doing the interview, because like the interview, like I knew what to say and like what the context and subject matter is.
Right. Wow. Did you feel like that helped you stand out and kind of gave you an advantage when interviewing, like being able to speak Japanese?
So I think that was the main reason why I actually
Mm.
like got a couple job offers like in only
Mm.
like 1 month, like
Mm.
right out of college, mostly because of the language level and also like having the technical skills to back it up.
Yeah, I had a kind of a similar experience. My first job I found all through interviewing in Japanese only. I actually was kind of happy when a company, because I would apply to some international companies too. Most of them would not look at me, but a few did. And like, I actually preferred the Japanese interviews, because I realized that when they look at me, they think, oh, there's no way this guy speaks Japanese. Oh, this is gonna have we're gonna have to like speak English and all this stuff. And then when I walk in and actually do speak Japanese, it allows me to like, I guess, start the interview off on like a really positive note, because it's like, oh wow, like I didn't expect this person to be someone who had put in this much effort. They're able to work hard on things, and it allows you to really kind of set a positive kind of stage for the interview. I found. Has that been your experience as well?
In my experience, the Japanese interviews were a lot easier than for the international companies. Like the expectations are very different. And just being able to speak Japanese quite well, like they rarely have candidates like that. And once you clear that bar, like, and you also happen to have the technical skills, then it's like a very easy decision for them.
Right. That's interesting. You said the expectations are different. What exactly was the difference in perspective, would you say, between the international and Japanese companies?
At the first company that I worked at, it's kind of known to be quite difficult to get a job there. Like they hire like a lot of Tokyo University, Kyoto University graduates that are like very good at like all the data structures and algorithm problems. But during my interview, like I got like a lead code easy kind of question, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I have no idea how to do this algorithm stuff. Because like I actually know how to build things, but not like the theoretical stuff. And they're like, oh, okay. And they just changed the question to be like a SQL question, and like a pretty difficult one for SQL, but like just like querying a certain data structure and like doing some manipulation on that. And then I don't know how that like actually passed that, but like it was enough.
Wow, that's really interesting. It's cool that they gave you like that they were flexible about that, because like not everyone has leak code type, like kind of computer science focused problems as a competency. So they were like, okay, but you can actually do the work that we do day to day. Like, you can work with databases and like backend development, whatever you were applying for. And so that they were able to actually check that instead and be like, yeah, okay, if you can do this, that's also fine. I wish more companies would let you choose.
I never had that experience afterwards though. Like that was the only time I actually tried it and it actually worked. So
That's awesome. So yeah, I think just stepping back a little bit, when you actually first decided to move, you applied from overseas, presumably. And what kind of like tools did you use? Like, how did you actually go about searching for a job?
At first, I tried to get a job from Belgium, just applying from overseas. I did like a Skype interview with one company that was quite slow, and like I also like didn't get that job. So I was like okay, to actually get any momentum, it's probably best if I actually just go there. So like spent one more summer working for a couple months and then actually going to Japan as a tourist for 1 month. Before going, I applied to like a bunch of companies, lined up a bunch of interviews as well. And then like a very intensive 1 month of just like interviewing. And then whenever I had time, like either like prepare or just see a little bit of Tokyo when I had time.
I see. So you compressed it all into like a month or so.
Yeah.
And
I didn't really have a lot more budget to make it any longer.
Right. And I'm guessing that you were mostly communicating with the companies in Japanese, right?
For most of them, yes.
Okay.
Like I actually used Wantedly to talk with most companies, and then I also like got to know one recruiter at like one meetup that I attended. Okay. At that time.
I remember back in the day when I was at around the same timeline when I was first searching for a job. I got my first job through Wantedly also. And I think I might have gotten my second job through them as well. They were definitely one of the first companies to really focus on like startups here. Yeah. And it was all Japanese, obviously. But if you could do the messaging and stuff like that in Japanese, you were able to figure out how to do that. It was a great way to find a job. Still is, I think. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it depends on like what kind of job you're looking for. If it's more like the startup, you value more the experience rather than the money side of things. I think Wantedly is like a great resource. I think at a certain point, if you start to value more like money or like certain kinds of company, like larger companies, then Wantedly becomes less useful.
Yeah, it's true. I guess it is really more focused on like the smaller kind of startup type companies rather than like the international companies or the maybe more established like mega venture companies and stuff like that.
Definitely, if you speak Japanese, like it opens so many doors. Getting a role at like a large international company is not easy. Only applying to those really limits your options, even though like they might be like amazing roles. If you actually want to live here, then that might be one way in.
Yes, I had the same experience. I don't think I would have found anything if I were just searching in English.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I had like 4 offers after that 1 month, and I think all 4 of them were Japanese speaking.
But I do think it's improved a bit. I think compared to, this was like
definitely
2017 or so. First time I searched for a job was like 2014, and it was like the whole startup thing was becoming a bit more mainstream. You know, people kind of knew about it. There was, you know, I think Mercari had just started or whatever, that kind of thing, but it was still pretty niche. And I think it's grown a lot, like the amount of VC funding and everything, the amount of international companies, like global teams that companies are hiring for and stuff have all increased a lot. So I think it would be a lot easier now, but especially back in the day, it was, if you didn't have Japanese, it was really, really tough. That's awesome. So you ended up landing at Wantedly, actually.
Yes.
And getting a job as an engineer. So I'm curious, like, what was it like to actually be in Japan working as a software engineer for the first time?
I was hired to be like the first engineer on their international expansion team. Well, like my work was like mostly Japanese in the very beginning. Like we started to hire more foreigners as time went on. Depending on who I was talking to, like it was Japanese or English, but it was very challenging in the beginning. Like I went through like the whole, how do you say, kenshu, like training for new grads when I joined. So that was also like all Japanese, but not only like engineering. We also had like this business etiquette, some like introduction to marketing, legal, like all those different kind of topics that I hadn't been exposed to before. That was challenging and interesting.
I mean, it's a great way to learn, kind of kill two birds with one stone, get some more Japanese. It's a different kind of Japanese, probably. It's some new vocabulary and whatnot, while also learning more about the Japanese culture and like that specific company and a lot of like marketing stuff or whatever. I feel like the amount of learning is going to be quite high for something like that. So that's cool.
Yeah, I do remember like one of the sessions, like we had to read like one page of Japanese and then do something based on that. I don't remember exactly what, but I only had like read half of it, and then everyone was like done with it. And I'm like, oh, I still have like a lot to improve. Like even though I can read this, I'm like a lot slower than like a native Japanese speaker.
I've had very similar experiences. I think one thing that helped me was we used to have to, when I would work at first couple companies, we would actually do a lot of like, whiteboarding, and we had kind of like this, I guess, Kanban process where we would write physical sticky notes and like put them up on a board, and that would obviously all be in Japanese. So I would struggle sometimes with like the kanji and stuff. And one day I realized that like it wasn't only me that was struggling. Like the native speakers around me would like mess up the kanji too, or they'd forget a kanji and just like write it in hiragana quickly or whatever, because they, like they read like kiban and it would just be like ki in kanji, and then just screw it, they'd write the ban in, that helped with me because I was like, wow, even they struggle with this. So like Japanese, it's just hard, especially the writing and stuff. So I don't know. I think you also get a lot of flexibility as a foreigner. People don't expect you to necessarily be able to do things at the exact same speed and stuff like that. As long as you're able to get the gist of everything and to kind of know what's going on, I feel like it's usually okay. Would you say that matches your experience, or
I have the exact same experience actually.
Really?
I didn't do like the Kanban stuff, but like when you would like have meetings and we'd write something on the whiteboard, sometimes people would forget. Right. Actually, one instance where I actually knew the kanji and the Japanese person didn't, and that was like that was really funny. But nowadays, I don't really write a whole lot of kanji anymore. It's usually just my address. So
yeah, that's the one thing you absolutely have to have down is the address.
Yes.
Yeah, same with me. And that's the thing, is they don't, like the Japanese people don't usually write it much either. So even they will eventually forget, if you don't do it for a decade or whatever it is,
Yeah, especially nowadays when you mostly just type and don't have to write as much.
Yeah, it's kind of nice in a way, like, because 50 years ago, if you came to Japan, you would have to write all the time, and it would be a big thing. You'd have to constantly be working on your writing skills. But now it's like if you can read the text that kind of pops up when you're just entering the text, you can read which one is the correct one and just select it. If you can read, you can write, basically.
Yeah, nowadays it's a lot easier. I don't think I would have had as great of an experience if I did this maybe even like 30 years ago, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Like technology has come a long way.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Like even just navigating the city, like without Google Maps or anything, like this is a lot more difficult if you don't really know.
They have English now too. That was not true. Even like before the Olympics or whatever, there was a lot of stuff that probably didn't. And I think now you can pretty much get around without speaking Japanese with the Google Maps, all the Google services, the Google Translate as well is pretty amazing. You just pull it up to something and it translates it all for you. So I think it's never been easier to live as a foreigner in Japan, I would say. But you think the time investment that you put into learning Japanese was very important and like pretty key in your ability to actually move here and work?
In my opinion, that Japanese itself has been very important for me outside of work, more so than at work. Just being able to navigate life in Japan, also like meeting people, making friends and stuff. Also now, my family, we all speak Japanese at home. So it's like, if I didn't know Japanese, that wouldn't have been possible. And I think like after my first job here in Japan, I tried to avoid jobs with like purely Japanese. I was like, I started to see like some trends in like working culture that are like more specific to Japanese companies and some to more international companies. And I prefer more like international working environments. So like I started targeting more of those kind of companies.
Interesting. Yeah, I had a similar journey. I started out just working 100% of the time in Japanese. And then eventually I was like, the value is not really in speaking Japanese because everyone here does. The value is in speaking both. So I really would prefer to be in a situation where like I can kind of use both and kind of be like an interface between Japanese speaking and English speaking teams and that kind of thing. And it's like, that's how to actually get the most value. Because like the fact that you're bilingual is the point, not just knowing Japanese. That's like the baseline,
Yeah.
So that's interesting though that you found it more valuable outside of work than inside. All right, you were working, and were you doing like back-end engineering, front-end? What were you focused on?
So the first year I did like full stack engineering. And then after a while I was like, I wanted to try something like more greenfield, like a bit more challenging. And then we were like rebuilding the iOS app from scratch. So I joined that team for like, I don't remember, like half a year or something. I basically had to learn iOS engineering from scratch. And and that was really fun, actually. Like I thought I was going to become more like of an iOS engineer at that time. like after that experience.
So I think one thing a lot of people are curious about is kind of the tech stack, in particular, if you use the same kinds of technologies here in Japan that you would in, say, like Silicon Valley or somewhere like that. Or is it like behind? Is Japan like not as cutting edge as those places? So would you say that like you were using really like the latest tech in your role at Wantedly?
It was different from Europe for sure. Like back home,
Okay.
I would use mostly like PHP and JavaScript. And I think a lot of companies would be using that. And that's also the only language I was exposed to back home. And then here, like at Wantedly, I started writing Ruby with Ruby on Rails, which I had never done before. So like actually had to learn that before I started working there. I also did a little bit of Golang. And then for like the front end, we had like a strange mix of JavaScript, CoffeeScript, and TypeScript, depending on which time it was written. It was like a different language. So that was interesting. And actually for iOS, it was quite modern. We were like on the latest version of Swift, targeting fairly recent iOS versions, doing things like reactive programming and those kind of things.
Okay. So you feel like maybe there's a bit more of a focus on like Ruby, which obviously was created here in Japan, maybe was as a result very, very popular for like web development here. It was popular everywhere. So maybe there's more of that than like PHP and backend JavaScript and things like that, which took off more so overseas than they did here, maybe a little bit earlier, but like front end wise, it was pretty similar, right?
Yeah, actually, like at Wantedly, the main product was like Ruby, but I think the more recent stuff was mostly like all Golang when it came to backend.
Yeah, that's a common stack now is to have moved from Ruby or PHP or similar to like Golang. I mean, that's really maybe a big one right now. But did you feel like you were missing out at all, like by being in Japan? Like you're maybe being held back technically, or no?
Maybe initially the kind of project that I was working on was maybe not the most challenging, because like I was the first person to be on like international expansion team, which meant that I was doing a lot of bug fixing because we weren't really ready for launching abroad. So like I think the first 7 months of stuff, I think I spent most of my time just fixing things, like a lot of localization issues, because like if you have a Japanese app that's designed for Japanese and then suddenly you need to put a German word in there, which is 5 times the length of the two kanji that's there, then a bunch of things break. So there's like a whole lot of things to actually improve. Well, maybe if I started working back home or in the US, maybe there would have been more challenging work from the beginning. But like I slowly like built up complexity in the kind of work that I did.
I see. So you were able to take control somewhat and say like, okay, I want to work on like this kind of project and make sure that I am kind of growing technically. So like you feel like you drove that a bit and like were able to kind of get yourself into more of a better fit, I guess.
Yeah, like especially like at Wantedly, which was also like a startup when I joined, it was like quite flexible. Like you could switch teams fairly easily. There wasn't like a whole lot of people, so like every team basically needed people. So as long as the business could justify it, like you could switch teams.
Interesting. That's always nice when it's a growing company. It creates opportunities because there's always some new team or like some team that needs another person or whatever. That's a great environment to really starting your career in, I think.
Yeah, I think like even though like Wantedly didn't pay the most out of all my offers, I think it was the best option in terms of like career growth and like having different kinds of experience.
Yeah, and it was definitely a very hot startup at the time, still very well known. It's a public company now, so they obviously grew, did very well, were able to IPO and everything. One of the kind of success stories actually of early startups in Japan. So yeah, it's a storied company. But yeah, and I guess you were kind of continuing to improve your Japanese skills as well as things went on. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned that there were some like a bit of friction due to the language, but like was that not too big of a barrier though, would you say?
Not for the main work that I was doing. It was like pull requests and stuff. I could write those in English as well. The people that I was working with could read English. They just could not speak it. So that actually made it easier for me to get started working in Japanese because like I didn't have to write like perfect Japanese just to describe my pull request body. And and they could write their comments in Japanese, like their review comments, and then I would either respond in English or in Japanese depending on.
Okay, so at least for like pull requests and things like that, it was okay to just use English. What about like code comments and stuff? Did they have a policy of just write those in English, or was it a mixture or what?
I saw a lot of Japanese there as well.
Okay.
Or like variable names with like katakana English in Romaji.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that. And I think most of the companies I worked at had a policy of like, please write comments at least in English, but you'd see Japanese anyway. Like, because when someone just doesn't have time, or certain people just were not very good at English. So like they would just have no choice, but just, I mean, if they wanted it to be understandable, they'd pretty much have to just do it in Japanese or whatever. So that's a bit of a struggle at certain companies. That's cool though. And then at some point, I guess back in like 2017, you passed the JLPT N1.
Yeah.
So what was that experience like? Was it tough? Did you have to study even though you had all this like kind of background, or like how did that kind of go?
So I actually had taken the JLPT once before that, I think the end of 2015, like when I was in Korea, and I failed with like a 90 something score, which is like just below the bar. And then when I retook it in 2017, I did pass, but I didn't have a great score. It was like 103, while the bar to pass is like 100. So it was like very, I did count it as passing, but I didn't pass with like flying colors. Actually, I had like a friend that kept making fun of it. It was like, just called me like 103er. I did do some study, but not much. Like actually, I stopped studying Japanese when I came to Japan because like I was just busy with life.
So like I did more Japanese study back home than after.
That is quite an extraordinary feat then to pass N1. Most people need to do a lot of directed study, even if they're living here. Maybe up until like N2 or so, if you're just like working pretty hard and talking to people and actually like living your life in Japanese is fine. But like N1, there's like a lot of difficult kind of arcane grammar and stuff like that. So
I'm not sure if I would say it like arcane grammar.
Okay,
it's just
you're right.
It's more formal or more like news-like grammar.
That's
but like there's actually not that much new grammar in the N1. Like if you look at like the grammar books for N2 and N1, N1 is like less than half what's in the N2 book. So if you spend maybe like a couple of weeks just like reviewing the N1 grammar, you're basically covered for N1 grammar.
Right, that's interesting.
Like in my opinion, the N1 is basically a starting point for Japanese fluency. It's only like a reading test. There's not much that gets tested other than that. Even like the listening part. The listening is a lot easier compared to the reading section. So if you have somewhat balanced skills, like reading, that is going to be the bottleneck. Like, can you read this accurately and fast enough? And other than that, I don't think it's as difficult, but you need to be a great reader. Like, actually retook the test a couple of years ago and had a much better score without a whole lot of direct study. It was mostly just reviewing some grammar.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting. I think you said it's the starting point. And I kind of want to talk about this, actually. I also passed N1, and I'm curious how it feels for you. Like, how would you describe like having N1, I guess, in relation to the total amount of Japanese knowledge that exists and like compared to like a native speaker or something like that? Do you feel like now that you have N1, like, and like a pretty good score, that's like enough and you're like pretty comparable to even someone who kind of grew up in Japan or something like that? Or do you feel like there's still a lot to learn even though you have the N1 level?
I think just passing N1 is still very far from like a native level Japanese speaker. You should be able to do most things in Japanese, but you're going to have a lot of gaps. And you're just going to need to spend time to fill those gaps. Also, like one thing that natives are great at is like accent and like pronunciation. Like for JLPT, that's not tested at all. Like you could have the worst Japanese pronunciation and then still have N1. That's like one thing you will still have to work on. However, like passing the N1, like it felt great. Like it took me, I think, close to 10 years or something since I started studying Japanese to actually pass the N1. So it felt like a big milestone. Like I accomplished something with my Japanese. So I definitely don't want to downplay it. But there's still like so much more to learn afterwards, I would say.
Yeah. I saw on Reddit once, someone was talking about like passing N1 and they were like, wow, how does it feel? And the person who passed it was like, it feels how I thought getting N3 would feel. Like I thought it would be like the end all be all and like I would just know everything. But really it's like there's still so many gaps, like you mentioned, and it's completely unrelated to your actual speaking skills or really any kind of
or even
production
writing.
Or writing skills, yeah. So I totally agree. I feel like it is a big milestone, and it does take a lot of study to get to that point. But in relation to living your life fully in Japanese and Japanese native speakers, it's nothing. Nothing.
Yeah.
Like, I think the gap between someone who's never studied Japanese in their life and me with N1 is smaller than the gap between me and my wife. Way smaller. You know what I mean? Like, she's a native speaker. So there's so much more to learn. And I feel like getting N1 is, like you mentioned, like basically the start point where like you can actually know the basics now. But you don't realize that until you pass it and you see that there's still so much more, you know?
Yeah, actually, like the other day, a Japanese person asked me, why does Japanese sound so much like a Japanese person's Japanese? And I'm like, I'm way more happy to hear that than have passed the N1. But that means that I've come like so far to actually get to that point, even though there's still so much more to learn.
It's interesting. I don't know. Because I don't want to dissuade people or whatever. I do think with a level of around N1, you can definitely get by completely. You can pretty much handle any situation that you'll face in Japan.
Yeah.
But if you think you're just going to be indistinguishable from like a Japanese native speaker, it's not true at all.
It's going to be very difficult unless you do like specific training, pronunciation, pitch, accent, and those kind of topics, which not many people do.
Yeah.
And then you're only going to be able to fool people on the phone. Because once they see you in real life, you don't look Japanese. They're going to be like, oh yeah, you're not a native speaker.
Right.
Yeah.
That's cool. I guess we have similar thoughts on that. Because I thought like N1 was going to be like, once you get that, you're done. It's like, no, not at all.
But I think at the N1 level, you don't really have to do like targeted studying anymore. I think most of like the core of the language you have down, and it's more like getting vocabulary or specific patterns for certain situations down. Yeah. And just building up that database in your brain.
Yeah, so that's a good question, actually. I'm curious, one, if you are still studying Japanese, and if so, like what that kind of looks like.
For me, studying Japanese has all been like somewhat difficult to describe because I initially studied through like AJAT, which is like all Japanese all the time, where you just expose yourself to a lot of the language, reading and listening, input-based learning. If you count it that way, I'm still studying because I'm consuming Japanese on a daily basis. I'm still reading several books every month, reading or listening, depending on how I feel like. And then what most people would consider studying is actually like learning vocabulary or learning grammar and stuff. Probably no. I just review my Anki cards, which is maybe like 1 or 2 minutes a day, but they don't really add new stuff. So it's like 10, 15 cards a day. So it's not a whole lot. So depending on how you count studying, yes and no.
That's cool. But I guess there's like actively studying where you have like flashcards and stuff like that. And then there is consuming native Japanese materials, like just reading whatever books, articles in Japanese, talking obviously to Japanese people. And you're doing that constantly. Your wife is a native speaker, right?
Yes.
This is another very common question people have, right? Is like, if you have a spouse or a significant other who speaks Japanese, can you learn it from them just by like living, with them or whatever? Did you feel like that was actually very helpful for you, or did you have a plateau as far as that went?
I think if you're going to learn from scratch, I don't think you should rely on your spouse at all. That seems just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
Because there's much more to a relationship than just learning a language. However, speaking-wise, my Japanese improved a lot just by being together. Like in the beginning, just being together for a whole day, speaking Japanese all day, my brain was fried. I couldn't handle that much Japanese within a single day. But as time went on, a couple of months went by, I had less issue with that. And then she started correcting some of my Japanese mistakes, and slowly that got better. There's still certain things I still make, some stupid mistakes, but
Of course.
It's gotten a lot better.
You also worked at a consultancy, Reactor, which is a kind of European style consultancy, and they have a Japanese office. And so you went from building an in-house product at Wantedly to now like project-based work. And I know you kind of experienced this a bit back in like your internship days, but can you talk a little bit about like the difference between that like Japanese startup and then now being in like a European consultancy, and what was that like?
Yeah, so I did join Reactor after Wantedly. So after working at Wantedly, I wanted a more like international experience. And Reactor seemed like a good mix of like the good parts of Europe, good parts of living in Japan. And also the people I spoke to there during my interviews and stuff were very nice people. And it seems like I could learn a lot about working agile and taking like the client into account, like being like more product focused, like not like just building for users that you don't really know. It's more like, okay, we need to build, for example, minimal viable product. And who are going to be our users, and those kind of user story mapping and those kind of ways of working were somewhat new to me. So I learned a lot about that. But then the interesting part is like, it's not just the company that I work at Reactor. It's also like the Japanese clients. So like you're also exposed to like the more Japanese side of business in Japan.
Was it a lot of clients who chose Reactor to modernize the way that they thought about tech, or like how did they think about using Reactor?
Yeah, mostly clients that wanted a more agile way of working because they had maybe some experience working with some other vendors here in Japan that work in a very different way, more waterfall, a lot of documentation, like just the classic SIR kind of project working. But that also actually made it more difficult for us to find clients because not as many companies are open to trying that. Nevertheless, wanting to pay a premium for that kind of work. That was, I think, the biggest challenge doing that kind of consultancy within Japan.
So did you feel at all like, because you would actually go and work in the offices of these clients, right?
Yes.
And then at that point, did you feel like you had to be like an ambassador for like the agile kind of European style development and like teach them, or how did that kind of feel?
Actually, that was a big part of our value proposition, is that we teach you how to work this way. So it wasn't just us working on the project. It was us and some people internally. And then once we were gone, they would take over the project completely on their own and keep maintaining it. So it's not like we were working on something and then we keep working on it forever. Most of the time, it's just a bit more short-term based.
Wow. So I guess there's pros and cons, but when you are constantly joining new projects and, you know, starting something from scratch, teaching them how to like handle it when you leave, and then maybe moving on to the next project, that's obviously a very different situation from in-house product where you're just building the same thing all day, right? Every day. So do you have like a preference between the two, or do you think both are necessary for like the career you wanted to build, or like how do you look at that now?
I think definitely I prefer in-house development now. I think it was a great experience to be actually exposed to that more consultancy kind of work, but I felt that for me personally, I wanted to have more like skin in the game. I wanted to own more of the product. And when you're like building products for other companies, you're gonna feel less attached to what you're building. You want to do great work, but you're not like the owner of this. You don't take as much ownership into the product as if it were your own team's product for, I don't know, for the next 3 years. It's a very different experience.
I guess at the end of the project, you kind of have to hand it off to them, and then it's to them. Some projects end up dying because they're just not able to take it over properly, or they just don't have the motivation to finish it or whatever. And that's got to be frustrating, right?
Yeah, not even that. Like, you might want to keep working on a project, but if the client runs out of budget, then that's game over. Like, you can't keep working on that. So there's a lot of factors outside of your control that are maybe not as nice compared to like when you work internally. Although internally you have a lot of the same issues, but it's not as pronounced. Like running out of budget, like the whole company is going to probably run out of budget. Like, there's a very different kind of issues.
I see. So do you feel like you were able to have pretty good work-life balance at that point, even though you were doing a consulting kind of position?
For me, yes. Like I pretty much just worked my 8 hours and closed my laptop. I did have one client just around the time COVID started. Like sometimes had like these stand-up meetings at 7:30 or 8 a.m., which was like the worst. But like they were too busy during the day. That was the only time they had free. And that was like 2 weeks before COVID started. So we were like actually going to their office at that time. Wow. So I had to wake up like super early, and that was not great for me. That was I was actually very glad that COVID happened at the time. Because it meant I didn't have to commute. And I can just work from home, and I don't have to deal with as much of the bullshit of like having to commute, difficult clients. Okay. If not everyone is there, that's okay. They don't really see it as like it's still remote. So it's like, it's a lot nicer.
Yeah. Okay. But in a typical day though, outside of particular clients with maybe stand-ups at weird times and stuff, you feel like you had like a pretty good work-life balance. And is that like a theme throughout your career here in Japan? Or did you have like maybe some more overtime early on? Or what has that kind of been overall?
I think I had some more overtime early on, but I tried to stay within my normal hours as much as possible. I also I tried to target companies that don't have as much overtime.
Right.
Like you're never going to be able to avoid it completely, but there's a difference between doing a couple hours here and there than having to do like 60 hours overtime on a consistent basis.
I see. But you were able to select companies to work for that you knew would be on the lower end of requirements in terms of overtime, and you knew that they had good work environments and that kind of thing, right?
And definitely, like the longer I got here, the more people I get to know. Like just by talking to people, you get to know which companies have better environments to work for, and which ones have a lot of overtime, but maybe they pay a lot. Maybe some pay very little, have a lot of overtime. Like there's a bunch of different combinations that you can have, and kind of need to figure that out for yourself because I don't think a lot of this information is publicly available. But, like, people don't want to talk about this for obvious reasons.
Right. The companies aren't volunteering that information at the very least. Yeah. And a lot of the employees aren't either because they have really no incentive to go online and talk negatively about their employers. So yeah, that's interesting. But going to meetups, just talking to people, making friends here, you kind of learn, you get a feel for which companies are the ones to work for, basically.
Yeah.
So you started out in like a Japanese startup, then you did the consultancy, you jumped around a bit, but then ended up now at Indeed, which is a foreign company. So US, all right, well, okay, well, actually it's
a bit
hard, it's a little bit complex, actually. Yeah. So technically it's owned now by Recruit, which is a Japanese company, but it started as a US company. So I think it maintains a very Silicon Valley type vibe from what I understand, but would you say that's accurate?
Yeah. It's definitely more like a foreign style vibe. I'm not sure if it's a Silicon Valley vibe when it comes to working because I never worked there.
That's true. Actually, I think it's an Austin-based company anyway, so maybe it's more of like a US American kind of vibe. Okay.
But like the biggest difference for me was like the size of the company. Like up till now, I had only worked for a company with 500 people, but the Japan office only had like 20 to 30 people. So suddenly like going to a company that has more than 10,000 people, that's a very different experience. It was kind of difficult to adjust to that in the beginning.
Really?
Because, like the ways of working are also very different. Writing designs and documents, having that reviewed by a bunch of different teams, getting feedback, incorporating that. Like it's not like a startup where you have an idea, okay, a couple of days later it's implemented, deployed. Like what you're building can have effects to downstream services that affect maybe 20 teams. So like you need to have some kind of consensus and make sure you're doing the right thing before you actually do it. But like if you impact a critical service, that could cost a whole lot of money.
Right.
So it's very different in that sense.
Wow. And I guess the scale is absolutely massive as well, of course. Was that part of kind of getting used to that as well? Like just the amount of people using the site at any time, the amount of requests coming in and things like that? Or were you already kind of used to that?
That was the first time I actually worked with like such a large scale. And previously, you could technically run most services like on a single machine if you wanted to. And still handle the load. But like now, like I'm working on like the internal machine learning platform and just being able to serve all the traffic that we need to like match jobs and candidates. Like you're talking about hundreds of machines to serve all that traffic. So like, cost becomes a lot more important. Latency requirements. You have very strict budgets.
I see. I think I would consider it a Gaishikei, a foreign company, even though it is technically owned by Recruit. Do you think that is like the ideal situation for a software engineer in Japan? Like, is that the goal?
For me, it definitely was.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it is for other people, but I feel like I have a lot of the positive things about working in Japan and not have to deal with as much of the negative things. Like the working culture is very much the US style of working, the labor protections that you have here in Japan, which you don't have in the US. So it means that your job in Japan is actually more protected than outside. The salaries are more based on the US salary bands compared to Japanese salary bands, so that it's also very favorable. And this also depends on which Gaishikei you kind of join, but like you might have the opportunity to work on different kinds of projects. I think Indeed is kind of special in that sense that they have a lot of engineering here in Japan compared to others. For other Gaishikei, you might be limited to more like sales engineering or SRE kind of roles. So it kind of also depends on what you want to do.
I say. Yeah, I do think Indeed's very unique. They, like you said, kept the same kind of salary bands despite being in Japan, and do a significant amount of development here. That's one of the issues with Gaishikei is, right? A lot of the time, they don't do like the kind of core development here. They'll have offices in the US or around the world in other places where they're doing the majority of it. And then if you end up here, it's a lot of like internationalization type work. You're not building any like the core kind of product is a common complaint that people have, I think, about some of the FANG companies here and stuff like that. But that's not the case at Indeed at all. You're doing like core parts of the service here, right?
Yeah, actually, like that was one of the main reasons why I didn't keep doing like iOS development, is because like the kind of companies I was targeting were just not hiring iOS developers here in Japan. So it's like, okay, I'm gonna have to change my strategy here. And that's when I started targeting more like backend infra kind of roles.
That's interesting. So instead of deciding I'm an iOS engineer, I want to do iOS, and then finding the best company within that, you actually decided to prioritize the kind of company and like the work environment and the, you know, whatever, more so than like the tech stack and like even the kind of engineering that you were doing.
Yeah, wow. I think as long as like it's a modern tech stack, I'm kind of fine with it. I've switched around so much in terms of like technologies or kind of platforms that I work on that like it might take a little while to actually get used to it. Like you get used to it eventually. Although like when I joined Indeed, the only thing that was familiar to me was Terraform. Everything else was like a different flavor of whatever I was using. So there was like a whole lot of new stuff all at once. So that took maybe a little bit longer than normal to actually get used to that.
Do you feel like being in Japan has like held you back at all in terms of maybe your tech career? If you had moved to the US instead, do you think you'd be ahead of where you are or somewhere similar in your career at this point?
I'm not sure if I would be ahead or not.
It's hard to say, right?
There's different kinds of opportunities, especially in the US. I think for me right now, it would be very difficult to find something better or similar to where I am right now in terms of scale and like kind of technically challenging projects here in Japan. I think if I want to get a different kind of experience with the same kind of skill, I would have to leave Japan most likely. But at least right now, I still have like a whole lot to learn at Indeed. So I think for the time being, I'm still okay. But I also don't really want to leave Japan at this point. My whole life is basically based here. I've only been an adult here in Japan. So like, I don't know how to be an adult back home actually at this point. So like, it's
Yeah, I also moved here immediately after university, so I've never lived as an adult anywhere else. And I do deal daily with like the contrast between that fact and my physical appearance. I don't know if that has been an issue for you at all, but is that something that you get frustrated by day to day, or have you accepted it?
I don't look Japanese, so I just accept it. That's the easiest way to get over it, in my opinion.
Right.
Sometimes it might get annoying. Like when you're renting, they always ask like, but they're a foreigner, is it okay with you? And then sometimes they say no. But personally, it hasn't been like a very big issue. Like, if they don't want to sit next to me on the train, okay, that's fine. I have more room for myself.
Right.
I think for the most part, it hasn't been that bad. I think actually living in Japan, at least as a white European, is easier than living in Japan as like a Japanese person, because they don't have like the same kind of expectations.
So true.
Given that you actually speak the language though. So I feel very privileged living here in Japan in my current situation. I think it's not a given.
Right. And you actually bought like a mansion recently, right?
Yeah. Also, just to clarify, like a mansion in Japan is like, well, not the mansion, it's like a condo.
Yeah, I wasn't even sure what to call it actually in like English. You purchased a property, build like a large apartment building. Yeah, in Japan. Yeah. So you mentioned actually that sometimes when you are renting, there will be like some discrimination basically that happens with being a foreigner and not being able to rent certain places. But that's not actually an issue when buying a place, right?
Yeah. As long as you can pay for the place or you can get the loan, that's fine.
That's what I've heard.
They don't care if you're a foreigner or not, because like once they sell it, it's not their responsibility anymore. Like they have their money and you do whatever you want with their property.
Right. I guess that is one tip. It might be hard to rent a place, but if you're able to buy, then being a foreigner shouldn't be too big of an issue.
I think also for renting, it kind of depends on where you're coming from. Definitely coming from Europe, I got more preferential treatment. I know I had like coworkers from Vietnam that could never rent a place because they were from where they are. So they actually had to get the company to rent it for them and do it with like, I'm not sure what to call it in English, like Hojin Keyaku.
Yeah, like corporate contract.
Yeah.
That's actually a pretty sweet deal if they can get that, though, in some cases, because you can maybe save on some taxes and things like that potentially.
Yeah.
But people generally find something eventually. I mean, it's really sad that people show up in Japan all excited, and one of the first things they have to deal with is like this, frankly, discriminatory process of trying to find an apartment, and it puts a damper on the experience of getting to be in Japan and everything. I think that's really unfortunate. But yeah, the language I think helps a lot too.
Yeah, I've had oftentimes, but they can't speak Japanese, and then suddenly like, okay. Like oftentimes they're worried that they're not going to be able to communicate with you in case there's trouble. Like if you haven't sorted your trash properly, or you're making a whole lot of noise and they can't deal with like telling you that.
Yeah, and it just also I think shows that you have put effort into Japan. You know, so you're less likely to be someone who's just going to run back to your home country when things get tough or whatever. Like it shows that you have skin in the game basically here in Japan. So whatever they're worried about is less likely to happen. I think that's true for companies too. Like when you're, whether you're in a job interview or trying to get an apartment, it's like, I'm invested in Japan. I'm putting in effort. I care about living here and everything. And that tends to improve your chances of whether it's getting a job or an apartment or anything. I think it always helps. So
I think that's one of the difficult parts of like trying to get a job from abroad here in Japan. Like, you haven't really proven that you like want to live here long term. Like, well, if you leave after 1 year, like it's a big investment to get someone here, both in time and also money.
Totally. So I think usually to get a job directly from overseas, you pretty much need to make up for that somehow. And it's like you have to have usually just enough technical ability where you're a senior person and it's like we really want someone with this technical skill set. So we're willing to make that bet on them basically and like take that risk essentially of bringing them over and maybe spending money to help them get relocated and situated in Japan and everything. So there's like, you have to overcome that somehow. And usually the only way really is just with your skills, your technical skills. Or you can do what you did and come and physically search here and go to meetups and talk to people and hustle physically in Japan. Yeah.
Definitely do your research before you do that though, because like it can take a while to actually get the interview scheduled and everything. So if you know a company is slow, you might want to maybe apply 2 months in advance at least, or work with recruiters from overseas and have them help you line up the interviews all around the same time.
Yeah, that's the ideal. If you can interview all at a similar time and then kind of compare the offers that you're getting at the same time, potentially even like maybe do some negotiation and say, hey, I have this offer from this other company too. You know, that can help a lot when it comes to negotiation and things like that. So that is a really smart way to do it, I think. If you're able to be in a situation where you're getting multiple offers, of course, not everyone is, but
also timing is not always straightforward.
Yeah, definitely not. And it can take longer than you think it's going to. Yeah. So you have also been building some, I mean, I guess since you were a kid, you've been building all kinds of stuff and that has not ceased while you were in Japan. You have some side projects and whatnot. In particular, I think you have a project called Tadoku, which is a Japanese learning app or, I guess web service where you are, it's basically like a competition based thing, right? Where there's cohorts and like you can see who spends, I guess, the most time studying Japanese. Is that how it works?
So it's actually not just limited to Japanese. It's more like a contest to see who can read or listen to the most Japanese or like any language, foreign language as possible in a certain amount of time. So like it's usually like 2 weeks or 1 month, several times a year. And it's more to motivate you to spend more time learning your language because I come from like an immersion learning based background. This is more to encourage people that use the same kind of learning to actually spend more time and with the language and get better. This actually was not a project that I started. This was an existing project, but was going to be shut down. And then I took over it and rebuilt the whole code base. There are several different iterations of it. Yeah, I think we have like 100 people or something joining every time.
Wow.
So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Any plans to like productize this, maybe monetize it?
I don't think there's any way to monetize this. I think this is way too niche, not something people want to pay for. But it's something that has allowed me to experiment with different kind of technologies that maybe at the time I wasn't able to use at work. For example, I used it to learn Kubernetes because when I was building it, like we didn't use Kubernetes at work. So like once I started actually using Kubernetes at Indeed, it was also something I was familiar with, but it was only like maybe a year after joining when we started using it within our team.
Cool. It's a good technology to know. How do you like using Kubernetes?
I mean, it's way overkill for a side project.
Yeah, of course.
It's way more expensive than using just like a single VPS or something as well. But like, it's nice to have some playground to deploy different kind of applications to, even if just temporary.
I agree. It's a lot of work to get set up properly and everything. But then once you have it, it's really nice to just be able to throw something up quickly in that kind of Kubernetes
once you have everything automated as well, it's a lot easier like to deal with deploying things. It's just like copy paste one existing project, change some of the details, and then you have a new application up and running, more or less.
Yeah.
So
exactly. But for now, you're happy working at a company as an engineer. You're not trying to like necessarily go and start your own business or anything like that.
Not right now, at least. Like I feel like it's not the right time for me right now that I want to take any kind of risks. I think for my family, it's more better if I stay employed for the time being. Maybe in the future, if I have like a great idea or if I find someone to like build a business with at some point, maybe. But I don't think right now it's the right thing. I definitely like building things on the side when I have like motivation.
Right.
But actually finishing things to actually get it deployed, that's like a different kind of story. Like I have a couple of side projects that I have 90% there and I just maybe need to spend like 1 week finishing it.
Yeah. That's cool. And then you mentioned you want to just be in Japan. Do you think that's going to be like for good, or do you think you'll end up moving back to Europe at some point?
Right? I definitely would like to be in Japan for quite a while. I think also like things like retirement and stuff, like once you start also like paying into this kind of like financial products like iDeCo and stuff, like it also becomes more difficult to leave as well because you kind of want to keep paying into that. And also like it's not as easy to leave Japan when you have property and you want to keep it, or if you want to go put it for rent, then there's also the issues with like coming back. You can't just like get the tenant out of the house, and there's a bunch of different things to deal with. So at the time being, I think Japan is probably the right place. But maybe in the future, maybe like short term somewhere else might be an option. You never know.
And you've been in Tokyo pretty much the whole time, is that right?
Yeah.
And no interest in maybe trying to move somewhere else in Japan, like moving to the Inaka or like a different city or anything like that?
I do not want to live in the Inaka. That's like that's what I wanted to escape back home, because like
I see.
Was maybe not the Inaka exactly, but it was like close to it. So like I very much appreciate the city life, having convenience everywhere, being well connected to everything.
You never get overwhelmed. I think to some people, I think Tokyo can feel like a bit of a concrete jungle, and they maybe wouldn't want to live in somewhere with like such kind of high density and whatnot. But that's not an issue for you?
Not so much. I kind of got used to it, I guess. Like I would hate to live in like middle of Shibuya. Like there's too many people over there. But like there's areas in Tokyo that aren't as densely crowded.
I think that's what happens eventually. If you've lived in Tokyo for at least like a few years, you tend to gravitate towards certain areas with green, you know, whether it's a park or like a river or whatever, you know, there's a lot of areas like that around the city.
Yeah.
And you find a way to see like some green and not, you know, you're probably not going to be living in the center of Shibuya or Shinjuku or whatever.
Yeah.
Especially if you have like a family and stuff like that. So
yeah, it also does make things more challenging. Like if you need to worry about schools or like transport to work or to school and those kind of things. So
true. So yeah, I guess it sounds like you're pretty comfortable here in Japan. Like you have a pretty good thing going. But if you could start over, is there anything that you would do differently, or do you think this was like the perfect path for you?
Oh. Maybe I would have spent more time doing lead code and like algorithms kind of stuff early on in my career, because that was like a big gatekeeper for me personally, because even though I didn't do like formal computer science and more like applied stuff, I didn't really have a background in that, so that basically blocked me from those kind of jobs that require that kind of knowledge in the interview process. But then again, I don't think that early on in career, like you have to work at those kind of companies. You can slowly work your way up and improve your skill set and just be more confident in those kind of roles.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I mean, I do think that your path was very interesting somewhat unique, but like a very effective one, because you get to experience basically all the different types of companies. Like you said, tons of different tech stacks. And I think you landed at one of the best companies in the tech ecosystem here, indeed. And so I think you've done extremely well and are really an example of like a success case for a software engineer in Japan, like almost like the ideal kind of path, to be honest. You've worked at some really great companies on some really interesting projects and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot that people can learn basically from your story. I mean, I guess, do you have also any advice for someone who wants to do something similar?
Like personally, I would definitely learn as much Japanese as possible before coming here. So you'll be quite overwhelmed by the time you get here. That might not be easy if you don't have the time. Like if you want to move here in the next couple months, that's not really very effective advice.
I mean, a little goes a long way too, though.
Yeah, I never been here with very little Japanese, so it's a very different experience. That I know.
Yeah, but I still think even like conversational level is worth a lot more than like nothing.
True. Especially if you can just hear the word and then be able to put it in a dictionary. That's already like a very important skill as well.
That's true.
Oh, other advice. Yeah, especially early on in your career, I would value like the kind of work experience rather than like salary. And oftentimes I hear like people that want to move here and they have no work experience, and then they're like asking for a starting salary that's more on the senior end for Japanese companies. Then that's gonna make it very difficult for you. You either like have the skills and to be able to land those kind of jobs, or you need to start lower or start different kind of companies. I think time basically solves that. As long as you are in control of your career. I think if you're too passive about your career, maybe that might not work out as well.
I see. So be active, intentional about your doing. Make sure that you are growing and experiencing different, whatever, like work styles, companies potentially, and don't just like get stuck in a rut at the same company and the same project.
Yeah.
Stop growing, right?
Yeah. Definitely for Japan, I've switched jobs more frequently than most other people. Like usually at around the 2-year mark. And I feel like a lot of people are kind of afraid to do that. But as long as you're like making a jump that's positive, like either like more responsibility, more complex product, you're learning more, then those jumps are usually fine as long as they're not like too short. Like if it's like 6 months to a year, that's maybe a couple of red flags. But as long as you can actually like talk about what you did in the interview, like positively, and you think that's like worthwhile experience, then I think you're going to be fine.
I mean, if you're applying to jobs, you can kind of see what the offers are and envision what it would be. And like, if it's enough better, right, then it's kind of worth that risk of like having a little bit of a shorter tenure at one of the companies on your resume, right? You shouldn't just do it for whatever, a very small salary bump or anything like that.
Yeah. Like if you only get like even if it's like 5%, 10% jump, usually that might not be worth the risk if you're not making any other improvements in like the experience side or different kind of like responsibilities. Especially in Japan, if you switch from like Japanese company to foreign company, like the salary bump can be massive. Like I know of cases where they like triple their salary just by making that kind of jump. Like you need to kind of like set up yourself in a way that you actually can land those kind of roles. Yeah. Like look at the job descriptions and see what they're looking for. If you maybe not are able to get the experience at your current company, maybe find another company where you can get the kind of experience and then make that final jump.
Well, I think that pretty much covers it. That was a very interesting discussion, though. I think there are a ton of insights around both like careers as well as like learning Japanese, life in Japan. I think covered a lot of ground. So thank you so much for sharing all of those insights. I guess if someone wants to reach out to you, is there somewhere that they can go to kind of, I guess, learn more about what you're up to, or maybe like message you if they have questions?
I guess Twitter would probably be the best way to get in touch with me. Twitter or LinkedIn, maybe.
Yeah, we'll share the links to your social media account if you want to, I guess, learn a little bit more about Anton. Other than that, if you enjoyed this episode of the Japan Dev Podcast, please give us a like. Please subscribe. Add a comment if there's any questions or any comments for us. We will take a look at those. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it for us. Thank you so much, Anton, for joining and sharing your story.
No problem. It was a pleasure.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.